Hi, I'm Annie Anderson, and the college student population that I have been studying and researching lately has been pre-service teachers, specifically in the Montana University system. As many of you probably already know, there's a teacher shortage in eastern Montana. In fact, there's a teacher shortage in most of Montana in rural schools. And my question was, what is the university system of Montana doing to help this problem? Or do they even think it is a problem? So what I have prepared for you today, this is a presentation on teacher shortages in rural Montana and what are Montana universities doing to prepare pre-service teachers for rural education. So I think it's most important to define what is a frontier and rural school. Well, according to Montana's Small School Alliance, a frontier school is defined as a school located in a district with 200 or fewer students and its attendant community is located in a county with 5 or fewer people per square mile. Does that sound familiar? It is where I live. So REAP, which is the Rural Education Achievement Program, defines rural as a combination of the district size, the population density, but also considers the poverty levels in that area. So, rural education. Did you know that of the 819 schools in Montana, only 51 of them have more than 500 students? So if you take 819, subtract 51, the majority of our schools have fewer than 500 students. 92 schools have only one teacher. And that's today, like 2020. More than 50% have fewer than 100 students. 65 schools are considered one-room schoolhouses, and 96% of our public school districts are classified as small rural. 96%. The majority of Montana, which is the 4th largest state and has a density population of the 48th in the United States, has the highest amount of small rural school districts. In fact, 42 out of 56 counties have less than 5 people per square mile. This is where I call home, and this is where I want quality education to be. I think before we start talking about rural teaching, we have to also think about rural literacies, and let's just define that before we move on. So what is a rural literacy? Rural literacy is how people perceive rural writing, rural reading, rural communities, the culture of rural areas, and it's very similar to imagery, and that means that it's very subjective. How you think of a rural area and how I think of a rural area would be based on our personal experiences, our backgrounds, and what we've had interactions with rural areas. If you grew up in a rural area and felt it was a positive situation, you are more likely to go back to that area and that community. If you grew up in a rural area and it was not a positive, you are less likely to come back to that area. If you are from an area of an urban background and you're not familiar with the rural ideas, then you have what only you've experienced through books or TV or movie or other people's experiences. And what we have to remember as rural teachers going into rural education is that everyone is experiencing things differently than we do. Everyone's background is going to be different, and I'm going to assume all of my students' background is going to be different than mine as well. So if you think of this barn, this kind of broken down barn we have on a picture here, this could be a nostalgia thing. It could be like a romantic Western thing. It can be kind of, poverty stricken. It could be bringing up images of racism and bigotry. It could be the one-room schoolhouse on Little House on the Prairie, or it could be more of like, Catcher in the Rye, where we've got the poverty, or it could be, where To Kill a Mockingbird, we have a lot of racism and bigotry. I think it depends on where you grew up, how you perceive rural education is how everyone is going to look at rural literacy. So as instructors, as teachers, as educators going into areas where they have populations, it is so few students, we really have to make sure that we need to get past our stereotypes and our thinking and past our own perceptions and look at the bigger picture. But I think that's one of the things that's hard for people who have had a negative experience with rural education. Okay, so here's the big question. What are Montana universities doing to help this problem. So if you notice on my right hand side, it says in 2021, 83% of teacher vacancies were in rural schools. And if you go to the OPI website, which hopefully you're all familiar with, if you go to teacher jobs, employment for teachers, if you click on that, still to this day, I mean, we're well into our school year, there are schools that do not have enough teachers to cover this year's teachers, let alone next year's teachers. So there are pages and pages and pages. Last time I looked, there was 511 openings for school teachers, most of them in rural communities, still posted on the OPI website. All right, so then I did some little digging, like what are we doing about this? So Montana State University really does a great job of helping pursue that idea of rural. One ways they did this is they had pre-service teachers have rural experiences on site in class, so they went out to different small communities around the area, around my area, so it was quite a ways away from Bozeman, and they went into the schools and they just did a lot of observing, student teaching, helping type activities just to see if that was going to be a success, and it was a fantastic success. I have the link to the news article on there if you're wanting to know more about it. The University of Montana Music Department also felt there was a need to get students, especially pre-service teachers, into rural schools. And so what they did is they went to the legislator and said, hey, we need some money. And they were funded on the spot for a program called ROAM, which is Rural Outreach and Music, where they went out into rural schools and tried to inspire people to go into music that hopefully want to return to a rural teaching setting in the music area. So the other one was University of Montana Western has this thing called Rural Fridays, which has sounded pretty cool. What they do is they invite all the homeschool and small school students to campus once a week, and they are taught by pre-service teachers. And this is a great way, kind of second best, great way to get teachers involved with small school culture. The best way, of course, is to go out to that school themselves, but in this case it didn't really work out. So students came to campus. And even OCHE has kind of gotten in on this. So the Montana University System Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education started this task force called Educator Recruitment and Retention Task Force. And this was where 6 universities got together and tried to figure out what are they going to do to help this problem. And it was off to a great start in 2017. Of course, it's been kind of sidetracked because of the pandemic, but it's been a great start, and I'm really hopeful that we see a lot of great things come from that. There was also a House bill called House Bill 403 that was passed. It's called Montana's Grow Your Own Teacher Grant program, and this is where rural schools will be able to help 1 or 2 of their students with college expenses, costs, and online services, with the idea that they would stay in their hometown or return to their hometown and go into that, that would go into their school and becoming the teacher. So Grow Your Own has become one of those kind of buzzwords in education, but it really works for a lot of people. So my thing is that something needs to be done. I mean, those are great things to start, but I don't want them to be one and dones. I don't want them to have an idea that this is going to be a great start and then we don't hear anything more from it. So something needs to be done. Rural communities are struggling in recruiting and retaining teachers in rural school districts. The programming and initiative that I talked about prior is a great start to change perspective towards rural education in Montana, but for the future of Montana's rural education system, more emphasis and attention needs to be given to this continual problem by all parties involved. We need to have our small school districts become advocates for themselves to recruit qualified teachers. We need to have our university systems prepare students to want to go into rural education. If they don't want to, at least they've been exposed to it. We need to have funding available for our students, university students, to go into rural education and maybe have some of their student loans paid for. Maybe we have help with online services like a professional development. There are lots of proactive things that are going on. I just don't want to see it end. I want to close my presentation today with a academic poster, and I know this is probably hard to see on this small screen, but I can kind of walk through some of the things that I had learned. So pre-service teachers filling the teacher shortage in rural Montana. So the introduction says, yes, there is a shortage, this is a problem, and there's some statistics in there from OPI that I had spoke about earlier about how many openings are still in our area. So, and when I talked about it has to be change on all parties, the recruiting and retainment of teachers, this really is on the smaller school districts. So what can we do as a university system or as a school district to help those smaller schools recruit and retain quality teachers? This chart right here tells like the median earnings in rural and urban areas by educational attainment. So meaning that even if you got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, yes, you are still going to be making more money in an urban area, but we have to look at the benefits of rural education has on lifestyle, mental health. If this is where you're happy, then you can still be able to make a good living on it. So pre-service teachers in this area right here, we talked about, there was a study done out of University of South Dakota and also South Dakota State University that asked their students, like, do you want to go to a rural area? And if you do, why? And if you don't, why? And so they talked about different biases the students had going into rural education. One of them felt, lack of amenities, lack of resources, lack of support and those kind of things, feeling that they might be isolated or on their own. So if those are some feelings that our students are having, what can we do as a community or university system to kind of combat some of those real feelings? And so the conclusion for this was that teachers really do have a huge job in the community as far as what's expected of them, what they need to handle, how they can handle it, and then also being in those situations where you may be more isolated and have less resources. But there are a lot of beautiful things to rural education, and I just feel that students, pre-service teachers, if they are exposed to all of this prior to making that decision of their first job, they might be likely to pick a rural education for a career. So I have a QR code here for my annotated bibliography for this paper if anyone is interested, and also there's a literature review to go with this paper, or this poster, I'm sorry. So if you'd like to do that, you can go ahead and shoot a picture of that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.